Okay, so we're recording. We're here this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on when people are watching this, with Lobo Pasolini, who is a writer, a teacher, and a vegan activist. Good morning. You're in Berlin right now.
Yes, good
Well,
morning, Poliana. How are you?
I'm well. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, as you said, I am a teacher. I have been teaching since I was 17. I'm also a writer. I've written 3 books. I've just finished another one, and I'm working on a new one. And since 2008, I've been a vegan activist. And on top of that, I've always been particularly a LGBT activist because when I lived in London, I worked for an LGBT publication. So that has always been a big part of my life. In fact, my dissertation, my graduation dissertation, was about the representation of LGBT issues in the media back in the early 90s. So that's another very dear issue to me. And so that's what I try to do. I try to combine my work with my social justice interests because I think in the end it's all about that justice. So and I think teaching is a great way to promote a better world as well. So I find my work is also related to that in a way because without education we don't get anywhere. So
And this is why I'm having you as a guest speaker in my classes. I teach international English in the pre-university courses here in Norway. And
mhm,
some of the topics that we discuss in class are topics related to English speaking countries, especially
mhm.
the United States and Great Britain. I believe you have lived in Great Britain.
Yes, I lived in London for 15 years. So I was there from the mid 90s to 2010. So I feel a bit like a Londoner, really.
So, what I want to ask you first, which is something that we will be discussing this year, and my first year students in their first year of high school, they will be doing a project for Black History Month. We tried it last year and it worked tremendously well. And one of the topics that we will be discussing is Black Lives Matter. I'd like your opinions about this, and I want you to go beyond Black Lives Matter, but what it represents worldwide, as well as is the looting and the rioting, does it have a place? Is it justifiable? Does it have a cause? How do you see all of this?
Right. Well, I think Black Lives Matter is definitely very necessary. It's an expression of frustration, of anger, which is totally justified considering the structural racism in America. And I think Black people in particular have been at the receiving end of one of the greatest injustices in the world, which is slavery. And America was built on that. And even though we had a lot of progress in the 60s with Martin Luther King, things have improved, I believe. Of course, we had a much more segregated society in America. But when we look at the prison system, and when we look at the police action, and the case of George Floyd was something so outrageously graphic that I think it's impossible not to see us to see the need for a strong reaction. And obviously we as non-black people, in my case, we have to be allies, because it's not enough not to be racist, but you have to be anti-racist. Yeah, so I think a lot of people are waking up to that. Regarding looting, well, I think of course it's always better if things don't escalate into violence. But I also find it impossible in a world where the powers that be are violent, where the police is violent, and where quite often they infiltrate protests to make them violent. So I think usually the looting happens as a consequence, or the vandalism of of the police action in the first place, which is very repressive. So I think obviously it's not a beautiful thing to look at. It's not desirable, but I think it's very complex and it's not easy to say, okay, this is right and wrong. We have to sort of pick it apart quite carefully and look at what causes it. But I think a lot of anger and frustration can lead to that. And I personally think sometimes it's inevitable that things like that happen. You know, it would be in a perfect world, it wouldn't. But in the world that we live in, I think, yeah, unfortunately.
What was the impact of these news all over Europe in your neck of the woods where you are in Berlin? How
Mhm.
was this received by people over there?
Well, Berlin, of course, is a city with a very strong social awareness. So there was a massive gathering here in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and when during that period when America was basically one big protest. So Berlin, of course, is very much on board with that. Black Lives Matter resonates here because it's a city that is welcoming to refugees. It's a city of diversity. It's a city of inclusion. So for sure, I think here in Germany, especially in Berlin, it's a movement that is seen as necessary, and it kind of dovetails with the mentality of the city, which is all about inclusion of all types.
Goodness. So, what are your thoughts about Donald Trump, and was he responsible for what happened on the 6th of January?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about it. He said it. I actually wonder why people doubt of his responsibility. I guess on legal terms you have to do that, but to me, it's so clear because he was inciting people openly. There is footage of that, and it's there to see. I mean, the only reason why he's not in jail yet because we know that powerful people, uh, well, they have their connections and they have power, and it's more difficult. But to me, it's as clear as the day that he is directly responsible for what I think is an act of terrorism. It's an assault on democracy. And I think the only happy outcome of this would be to see this man locked up forever. What he did to the American people on that day was an assault on their most essential values. People died, and he created a lot of instability. And yeah, I think he's clearly responsible for that. And I hope to see some justice in that case. Yeah.
I feel like at this very moment, there's a bipolar kind of reaction in America where there are so many people who are very conservative and who are
Mm,
on his side, and they tell a different story. I've even heard it described as, well, I had a Saturday night out that was more violent than that, what they call the big invasion of the Capitol. There are people downplaying it, and
mm,
there is a lot of how do I put it? A lot of animosity towards the new president, Biden.
mm.
What do you think about that? They're very angry at him right now because of Juneteenth, which they just celebrated, I believe it was Monday. And he was the one that made it a public holiday, the day that slavery was abolished in the South in the United States. What do you think about this whole animosity towards Biden?
Well, I think America is a country that, unfortunately, at the moment is under the grip of a lot of fake news, a lot of conspiracy theories, and I think, unfortunately, the Republicans have become an extreme right party. They're not a conservative party anymore. I think this term, for one, needs to be replaced because conservatism is okay. I can live with that. You respect the institutions. It's a different story. But what we have now, quite often criminals who use hyper, uh, they use a kind of rhetoric that is aimed at confusion and creating fires, like all the time. And unfortunately, America has a big education problem. And I think a lot of the people in the Midwest, especially in the Bible Belt, they don't have much access to information. And They're very, very parochial minded. And I think there is this obsession with guns, obsession, a fear of the foreigner. And I think they play into that, you know, they know what they're doing. I think it's all about manipulation. So I think this animosity towards Biden comes from that, from this absolute dishonest, criminal way that the Americans have been brainwashed. And I think it's very sad what happens because I think America has always been an example of democracy, but at the moment, I think it's not doing very well. And it has a lot to do with this. Unfortunately, social media has exacerbated all of that because people live in bubbles and criminality is not punished as it should. You know, the spread of lies and conspiracies. I mean, we had a very good example during the pandemic where taking a vaccine became a political issue. I mean, if you are against vaccine or not, I mean, that was never the case. So you see how things work. You know, they can even turn science into a kind of communist ideology, which is one of the biggest phantoms. You know, they use a lot this fear of communism, a bit like in Brazil as well, you know, to manipulate people. So I don't think Biden is the best president in the world. I don't think so. I would have preferred Bernie Sanders, to be perfectly honest. But in the face of the threat that Donald Trump represented, I was very happy that he won. And I stand by him. I think he's personally a good man. I think we have problems with the party itself, which is very corporate, you know, the Democrats. And so we know the problems that go with them, you know. But I think the people who are Republicans and their animosity comes a lot to do with the way the Republican Party is now run by basically thugs, I would say. You know, there's a thug mentality going on there. So that's my view on that.
There is a lot of talk here at the moment with Pride Month. There has been a lot of celebration in Norway. We are a very inclusive society, not as inclusive as we should be, but there's a lot of celebration going on. But by the same token, there is a tendency for people to, well, let us just say, stores and businesses to use that as a prerogative to make money. They
Mm.
don't really stand behind the cause, but they're using the situation. What do you think about that, about Pride Month?
Well, I think pride, of course, is very necessary. And I think the word pride, so people understand, is used because gay people are brought up to be ashamed of themselves, to feel they are inadequate, to feel they are wrong somehow. So the concept of pride is an antidote to that. So you give people the sense of value that they deserve. And of course, over the years, there has been a commercialization of gay culture, of the rainbow flag, and that's the nature of capitalism. You know, they will cash in whenever possible. So I think businesses are welcome to support. I mean, you can't do anything about that. And in a way, I don't think it's a bad thing in itself. Of course, some of them are opportunistic. Others, I think they are full-time allies. And I think it's up to the individual to see through that, you know, to see who really just wants your money, your pink pound, as they say, the pink dollar, or who are actual allies. But in principle, of all things that can happen in the world, I don't think that's a bad thing, you know, of course, that people feel, okay, I'm gonna talk to the LGBT community during Pride Month and show my support, even if you have a financial interest behind that. Of course, I would prefer if everybody would be full-time allies and not just for the money. But I also think that it's very important during Pride Month that we celebrate all of this, but remember that it's much more than lifestyle and it's much more than a consumer niche. It's it is still there's a lot to be done because we have these places like Norway, which are islands in the world. In most of the world, gay people still suffer terribly. They are killed, They have no rights. I mean, if you actually, I would say most of the world, so Europe, some parts of America, some parts of Brazil and Argentina, for example, they are, yes, they have evolved a lot. But if you think about some countries where you can be punished with death or you have to live in the closet. So I think it's important to remember that on a global scale, there's a lot to be done, and we have to be solidary to our LGBTQI brothers and sisters who are suffering terribly in many parts of the world. So that's very important to remember. We should remain political about it.
Those are very wise words. I'm very happy to have you as a guest speaker
Thank
because I
you.
feel like we need to broaden the horizons of the youth that's going to use education in the future. I tell
Absolutely.
my students education is freedom. And I don't know if I mentioned this. I'm pretty sure they might be thinking you might be British because of your accent. I didn't say that. We're both Brazilian. We come from
Absolutely.
from I come from Vitória. He comes from Vila Velha. That's almost, it's very close.
We're neighbors. Yeah, it's the same thing. There's just a bridge in between.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What would you have to say finalizing this wonderful interview? What would you have to say to the youth in Norway about education in English?
Education in English. Well, I think education, for one, is obviously the passport to enlightenment. If you want to understand the world, if you want to be an active voice in the world, I think education is key. And I like to say education in the big sense of the word, not just what you get at school, but from the books you read, from the people you talk to, you're always learning. So education is much bigger than just doing a course. Yeah. It's a lifelong process. And I think that's what we're here for in this world. Of course, in English, it broadens your horizons even more because it's the international language. I personally love the English language. I've always loved it. I've started learning English when I was very little, and it has given me so much, I have to say. English has enabled me to do most of the amazing things that I have done in my life, so I think it's a great tool to have. And once you get started in languages, you don't stop anymore. So you learn other languages. I'm at my fifth language now. So I think just keep doing it because the more the merrier, you know. So that's what I have to say about that.
I like to bring this positive message to them about English because they are required to study English, but by the time they reach the pre-university courses, they have been studying it for 10, 11, 12 years and they don't want to do it and they don't like
Mm,
it. And I tell them one day you're going to use it somewhere. It's gonna
yes.
be a powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to look at languages as something that is a lifelong hobby because you need to keep it. Even your mother language, you need to keep learning. So don't see it as a burden, but see it as something fun, something interesting. It expands your brain. It gives you, I think, the more words, the more concepts you know, the more intelligent you are, the more capable of expressing yourself. And communication is everything. I think the right words really can make such a difference in the world. And being able to express yourself well is such a gift, you know. I really believe that. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems in the world is communication. So I think working on languages is a big part of that package of solutions that we need.
Thank you so much for this. It's
Thank
been
you for having
amazing.
me.
Yes, and
And
we'll have the students that start the next term now in August watch the interview, and then in years to come, other students will also
okay,
listen
wonderful.
to your
I feel
words
very
and learn.
flattered. Okay.
Well, thank you very, very much for this, and
Thank you.
I hope that you have a fantastic day.
I
And
hope so too. And I wish the same to you. And I hope you enjoy the summer in Norway. It won't last very long, I guess. So see you around. Thank you very much and good luck with your work. Well
thank
done.
you.